Welcome to the Military Transition Academy's PM Pathfinder series, where Max Rogers, former enlisted Marine turned naval officer and civilian energy industry project manager extraordinaire, teams up with the former Navy enlisted and Army officer candidate Eric Doc Wright, Vesta PM's founder and best-selling author, alongside Jeremy Burdick, a retired Air Force chief, aircraft mechanic and aviator turned civilian operations chief and process specialist for Vesta PM and the PDU University, bring you an audio-video suite to help you find the path while mentoring you in the profession of project management. Along the way, you can study for your CAPM, PMP, PMI-ACP, Scrum Master certifications, or just maintain your professional development units in a casual, enjoyable conversation between friends. Welcome back to another PM Pathfinder episode with Max, and we're going to talk a lot about the comparing of pros and cons of adaptive and predictive plan-based projects. We're also going to cover how to identify the suitability of adaptive approaches for organizational structures. So when we talk about structures, we're talking about, virtual, we've got matrix, we've got hierarchical, and then we've got, a lot of combo. So it'll be interesting. Projectized is another one. So we'll just kind of pepper in some different adaptive approaches and how they would relate to those structures. And then we're going to identify organizational process assets, or OPAs, and environmental factors that facilitate the use of adaptive approaches. So last episode was a lot of predictive. We're going to really just flip the script here and go more adaptive. So as we talk about adaptive and we really begin to discuss some of the pros and cons of adaptive and predictive plan-based projects, what's something that just jumps out at you when we're talking about the different approaches, adaptive versus predictive?
Well, I think the first thing to consider, Jeremy, is how well defined is the scope of the project at the beginning. If it's well defined, if it's something that you're normally used to doing, then predictive works just fine. I mean, that's why, if you're building a bridge or building a building or some kind of construction project or a lot of repetitive, manufacturing facilities or manufacturing processes, predictive works just fine because, you begin with the end in sight. You can do that. If you're in another type of industry like software development and maybe even now financial developments and looking at modeling and things like that of economies and stuff like that, where you don't know what the end state looks like or will look like or what it be, then taking a more adaptive approach where you just plan a little, do a little, deliver something to the customer, get some feedback, do a review, and then do it all over again. It seems to make more sense. The other thing is to consider, I think, is the organization that you're in. Some organizations are set up to do predictive projects. Some organizations are set up to do adaptive projects. Some organizations are in that transition period of trying to transition between doing the old traditional predictive methodology and adapting an adaptive approach. And that, I think, is the most difficult because you're left with all the legacy knowledge and culture of the predictive project methodology. And here you are trying to introduce this, what's basically a radical departure from that in order to focus on delivering value to the customer and bringing the things that you in a traditional environment where you've got a firm fixed price contract. Once the contract is signed, you basically keep the customer at arm's length as much as possible. Whereas in an adaptive approach, you got to bring the customer or at least the product owner onto the team and work directly with them. So the two, if you're just comparing predictive and adaptive, it's easy to tell the difference. When you start talking about the third model, though, the hybrid, where the two come together, that's when things get a lot more complicated because there are things like, for example, in an adaptive environment, there's nowhere near the amount of documentation required that is required in a predictive project. However, there are some artifacts and documents that you need in the adaptive environment. Number one, you need a project charter for just like you do in a predictive environment. You need some kind of issues log, whether if you call it a risk register or whatever, whether you write it on a whiteboard or put it on post-it notes or put it in a formal document, but you've got to have that. And the third one is your stakeholder management plan and or stakeholder register, because it's so important to keep that the stakeholders are intimately involved in it. The only way to make sure you're doing that is to keep a stakeholder engagement log of some way. Once again, like I said, in an adaptive environment where you're in a war room that the team shares, that's an open environment and collaborative and great communication. It can be a section of a whiteboard that you write it up on. Whereas in a predictive methodology, it's going to be in a 3-ring binder in a notebook in a computer file or something like that. And it's readily accessible, but it's not as open, and you don't have the open communications and collaboration in a predictive environment that you have in an adaptive environment. So I think that before, as a project leader or project manager, agile coach, Scrum master, whatever role you're in, when you go into an organization, you have to analyze, how sophisticated, number one, is this organization with regards to project management? And then what are they used to doing, traditional predictive project management, or are they used to doing adaptive? If they're used to doing predictive, but there is a desire to transition into adaptive, that's a great situation to be in, but there's a lot of warts associated with that you're going to have to deal with and learn and keep your team focused on agile methodology. And you've also got to train the organization. In one of his presentations, Doc uses a great example of that. He was hired to come into an organization to teach them and train them in agile. And one of the first things was discovered was the team needed, and they were working in 2-week iterations, and the team needed some specific technical training. So he lines it all up and gets it ready, and all they got to do is sign a purchase order for have someone to come in and provide this training. And the guy goes, well, we got to go, and this has to go through procurement, do this. Basically, it takes about 3 weeks to get this approved, so we can get a purchase order done. Well, then it boils down to, hey, look, you may have a stated desire to use agile methodology and to be an agile organization. But if you're doing 2-week iterations and it takes you 3 weeks to get a training purchase order in place, you're not agile. Okay. You're just not there yet. Now, doesn't mean you can't get there, but you're not there yet. And so you have to take all those things into consideration whenever you're looking at the pros and cons of which method, if you have the opportunity to pick or to analyze and decide which one you're going to use. Most organizations that I worked in, it was dictated, what this is the project management methodology we use. This is the requirements, whether it's a stage gate methodology or what it is. Every organization has their own method of project management, and that's what you have to adapt to. So,
yeah, well, great. There's a lot there. I'll start with predictive being plan-based, right? You're going to plan it all out, then you're going to start the project, then you're going to monitor, did we produce, and then you're going to close it out. Whereas adaptive, completely change-based, right? You don't always know what you're creating. And you said something that was really important is depending on if you've done it before and you know exactly what you're building. If it's a bridge, right, you're probably going to use predictive.
Right.
If you're not sure and it's like, hey, we need a solution to update people of their account balances on a mobile device, that might be an adaptive because you're not quite sure. The scope is a little fuzzy. We don't know exactly how to do that. So let's build a little, get some feedback.
Right.
So I really like that. Now, you also said something as well that I want people to hear, and just more of a recap, is plan-based models typically keep stakeholders at arm's length. not to shove them away, but because there's distinct points of communication and updates where they don't need to be super close to the project team. Whereas adaptive, we really try to bring stakeholders as close to the inner circle as we can because we want the continuous feedback. So in my mind, a couple pros for adaptive is flexibility, continuous improvement. You get the stakeholders, like you give them value early on in the project, and then you can mitigate risk in some sense of cataclysmic catastrophe risk, because if you're showing the stakeholders stuff in small increments, they can say, hey, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what I want, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have like the 11th hour problem.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You truly are eating the elephant one bite at a time in an adaptive environment. And at any time you can stop eating, or go pick another elephant.
Yeah.
So that is to me, that's the biggest advantage of adaptive methodology. And it comes back to the old adage of, when you find yourself in a hole, first thing you do, stop digging. Okay. Right. Put the shovel down. It's impossible to get out of a hole with a shovel. To get out of a hole, you need a ladder or a rope. With a ladder, you can do it by yourself. With a rope, you need a friend. But either way, you're not going to get out of the hole with a shovel that got you in a hole, that created a hole in the first place. And that, to me, is the biggest benefit of adaptive methodology. Is it's easy to lay the shovel down. Yeah. And at any point in time, say, look, this is going off the rails. This is that, we did not have the information when we started that we have today. And based on the information we have today, we'd have never started this. Yep. So because things have changed that rapidly and that quickly, and I think that is a model that our world is evolving into, is this rapidity of how quickly things are changing. And it goes from one thing to it. And if you notice, you can see it today. Look at all the name changes in technology. Facebook is now Meta. Twitter is now X.
Right.
Google is now Alphabet. Now there's a reason these tech companies are changing their names. It will become obvious to the public at some point in the future. But number one, you can bet it is to add value. It's a value-driven decision on each and every one of these companies. What that value stream is may not be illuminated to the rest of the world right now, but I'm surely it's illuminated within the companies. That's why they're doing it. But it's this change. Ford is not going to change its name. General Motors is not going to change its name. Kellogg's is not going to change its name. Those are legacy brands and stuff like that. Whereas, Facebook had no problem at all changing its name. Hey, let's change it to Meta, which more, it brands us in a better and a more realistic light of what we really are. We're not just Facebook. So, it's a testament to the world we're in. And I'm going to tell you, if you want to keep up, you got to learn to adapt. And that's what this adaptive methodology is. I've learned an awful lot about agile and adaptive methodology in the last several months. And I'm sold. I'm truly a proponent. I'm a agile evangelist, as the term that I've heard, because I really think it works. Now, if I went to T.Y. Lin to build a bridge somewhere in the world, I would not assume or expect T.Y. Lin to use adaptive methodology. They built bridges for the last 100 years all over the world. They know how to build bridges. I mean, they have a bridge building methodology that all they do is change the location and the design of the bridge. But the methodology of how you build and design and build a bridge, T.Y. Lin's got it. They invented it and they own it, and they're the best in the world at it. And for no matter where you're at in the world, if you need a bridge built, especially if you want a signature bridge built, the answer is easy. Pick up the phone, call T.Y. Lin. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But they use, I guarantee you, they use predictive methodology.
Yeah.
But but I guarantee you, they also have incorporated some adaptive techniques into that. So
Yeah.
they're probably a hybrid, more a hybrid company.
Yeah, I think hybrid is really where you're seeing the world go. I mean, it's hard to go like software development. I think you can go full adaptive. Construction, probably pretty close to full predictive. But most projects that fall between those two hard lines, it's like
Mhm.
bang, right? We're in this hybrid. You might as well use some of the elements. Some negatives,
Mhm.
just in the sense of cons for adaptive, I would definitely say is estimation. Like, how do you it makes it much more difficult to estimate the amount of money or resource allocation. So if we're changing things every day and we're saying, hey, I wanted this feature, but now I want this feature, well, I might have to go get a completely different set of resources. So resource allocation, I could see that being a big con,
Mhm.
and then just like stakeholder engagement. If you didn't have stakeholder engagement in an adaptive project, you're pretty much going to fail. Like you have to have that engagement with the predictive. So long as you got all the requirements up front and you can trace it back to certain stakeholders with your requirements traceability matrix, you
Mhm.
probably could be successful at day of delivery without ever talking to the stakeholders at large. But in an adaptive, you'd have a hard time delivering a product that they valued if they weren't really close and you kept them engaged.
But let me share with you something that I have just witnessed myself here over the last several months. That is exactly what you're talking about. Uh, an original traditional type of methodology, predictive methodology. Here in this area I live in Southwest Florida, home building is out of control. It is the speed and the pace at which it's happening. They're building developments with anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 homes in them. I see these major home builders, Lennar and Pulte, and these major companies. They come in and they build the actual dwelling itself, the structure. They're all made out of concrete masonry units poured on a concrete slab, laid on, starts out with a concrete slab with a plumbing and electrical embedded in it. They build concrete masonry unit walls. They put wooden trusses on it, and then they deck the roof. And then the predictive methodology goes away. Then they switch to adaptive because different customers, some want shingled roof, some want tile roof, some want flat tile, some want barrel tile, different colors, combination. Then you get into the floor plan is set, but then you have all the options of interior colors and finishes, cabinetry, floor covering, plumbing fixtures, all these things that lend themselves to adaptive type methodology because they're different. Instead of planning for a 4,000 home subdivision, which you can for the layouts and the structures themselves, and the trusses and the decking. After that, though, then you have to transition into adaptive because you're trying to sell this house, this product. You're trying to add value to your customer, which is the person who's going to buy the house. And if someone's going to spend $600,000, $700,000 on a house today, they want to pick their floor covering. They want to pick their cabinetry. They want to pick their countertops. It's okay. They accept the fact that, hey, the floor plan and the layout is what it is. But I want the light fixtures that I want. I don't want hanging light fixtures. I want recessed light fixtures, those sort of things. And I see that here in the home building industry. And that is because I grew up in the home building and construction industry. That is a radical change that 40 years ago, never happened. A builder built a house. This is the house. If you want it, buy it. You don't like the floor covering, take it out and put in new floor covering. You don't like the cabinet, the countertops, take them out and put a new. That's all up to you. And but now the model has changed, and I see it. So now you get in this, and it's not really a hybrid approach because it's very predictive methodology up until a certain point, and then it stops, and then it shifts to adaptive methodology. So there's a line drawn there. So I find that very interesting, and that's something that project managers are going to have to learn to deal with. And I think what they're doing is probably using two different project managers. There's a project manager or a group of project managers that manage the construction of the structures, and then and who are not customer focused at all. They're focused on production. That's what they're focused on, and the subcontractors. But then you have another group of project managers that take over, that they're completely customer oriented and focused. They want to put the finishes and fixtures in the house that their customer wants. And they understand that their customers sometimes don't know what they want. So you got to spend time with them. You got to show them the options. You got to show them the trade-offs. You got to show them the difference in the cost about if you pick this over that. And also, and that's entirely different model than just go build a house and put it for sale sign front of it.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think you pointed out some really good cons to the predictive side of things when you talk about limited flexibility.
Right. Adverse to change.
Right. Adverse to change. Yep. You always got to worry about scope creep, because if you lay out the plan and something changes, you need to defend that original plan. And then if you add on to it, that's scope creep. And now you've got more resources required than you had budgeted. So now you've got a problem there. I think it's also like kind of what you're pointing out, even with the house, you're not delivering value to the company on that, just building the structure. There's no value there ultimately until they deliver it to the customer and the bank pays them the money. So it's late delivery of value in that scenario as well. So those first project managers, if you will, they don't realize the value for the company up until those second ones come in, get the adaptive, get the customer on board, deliver the value, and then, now the money hits the bank account. So right. I think that's a really great example to talk through as you start to say, hey, there's some real good benefits. If we're going to do this predictive method to build the structures, I can plan for 10 structures at one time. I can go procure all these materials for 10, get a bulk discount,
Set up a supply chain that it just concrete, 40,000 concrete masonry blocks are delivered to the construction site every week. And you've got your production set up so that your block laying crews can lay 40,000 blocks a week. And then you get that in place and just go then. And that's the way it goes. But, you just talking about that, though, spurred a memory I had. And I did a project one time, an offshore project, 5-year project. And we spent almost a year doing a front-end engineering design and all this planning that went into it. And we developed this wonderful requirements document. And we thought we had all the requirements nailed down, stuff like that, and get everything done. And literally our requirements document wound up to be about a 40-page thick document. So I tasked one of my engineers to go back and go through each requirement and annotate if it was based on an assumption or a known requirement. And it took about 2 weeks for them to go through and do it. And I was shocked whenever they gave it back to me. Almost 2/3 of the requirements were based on assumptions that we had made. The remaining 1/3 were based on federal laws and regulations and compliance stuff that we had to do. So that was, we did, those things were in concrete. We had to do those to meet, but 2/3 of the requirements were based on assumptions that we had made going into this project. And the reason I wanted to do that was the project that I had just finished. When I got done and went through and we did our lessons learned capture and everything, we went back and looked at the assumptions we had made 5 years earlier at the beginning of the project, and how many of those assumptions had proved valid and had not gone through a significant change. And almost none of our assumptions were correct. They all went through some. And so then when I'm introduced now to adaptive methodology, and where I'm introduced to the concept of, hey, don't spend all that time up front doing all that planning that is based on assumptions that you pretty well figured out the assumptions aren't going to be valid anyway. So why waste the time doing it? Plan a little bit, do a little bit, deliver to the customer, get feedback, make some adaptations, do it again.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so it's like I said, I've become a real convert to adaptive methodology, even though I've performed and been involved and engaged in traditional predictive methodology my entire working career. I'm a convert to agile. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and obviously there's a great place for both. It's just being able to harness in the pros and the cons, which really brings us to the next topic of utilizing adaptive approaches for different organizational structures. So what we're talking mostly is, hey, are we virtual? Are we co-located? Are we a matrix structure? And then are we a hierarchy? So those are the kind of the big structures that we're going to cover. And I think one of the most difficult as we get down there to the last one is that hierarchical. How do we get an adaptive project into that? We'll leave that for you to bring up, but the easy one, I think, right? If I was teeing you up for a home run out the third deck, would be virtual teams. Adaptive methods in virtual teams.
Well, it's possible, but you have some challenges, and the challenges you need to recognize right up front, because adaptive methodology is based on open communication and collaboration, and is based on the premise that the team is co-located together. However, in today's world, and especially if you're working in a global company, that's just simply not going to happen. The good news is there is technology out there that allows you to bring in your non-co-located team members to ensure that there is communication and collaboration. But I think you're going to have if you have an adaptive project team that's not co-located, that is virtual, you're going to have a project manager, because somebody has got to, there's no role in an adaptive methodologies for someone to be the primary focus of leader and ensure community. Now, granted, the coaches and the scrum masters, yes, it's their job and their role to remove impediments and to do things like that. But it's a virtual team. Running a virtual team requires just about full-time focus on making sure your team members are engaged, that they understand what their task is, that they understand how their tasks relate to other team members' tasks, and that they feel like they are a member of the team.
Yeah.
And it's very challenging. It can be done today with the technology we have today, but it's if you notice anything that's been written by PMI about agile methodology, they stress the importance of co-locating team members and having the ward room, and it's because of this intimate osmotic communication of information on white information radiators that are posted in the war room, and that spontaneous information that you gather by overhearing two other members of the project team having a discussion about something, and those sort of things don't happen in a virtual environment. So somebody's got to make sure that all that information is transferred to everybody, and that can become a big job. So
I like how you put that. You almost have to have a full-time position that is dedicated to collaboration. Right? It's I don't know, care what you call it, a collaboration master that puts all the information in a pull methodology to where it's on a web page, it's on a board that's shared, that everybody's actively on. And I like all your example is wonderful. It's not really an adaptive project if you're not collaborating.
Exactly. And back to what you mentioned earlier about dealing with stakeholders and the different types of communication in a predictive environment. Typically, the communications you have with your stakeholders is a push type of communication. You send that information out. Whereas in an adaptive environment, because the information is clear, transparent, collaborative, and well communicated, and it's in a common location, the stakeholders can simply walk into the boardroom and they pull the information. You don't have to push it to them. And they pull, the benefit of it is they pull the information that is important to them at that time. And then they turn, and they don't need to ask questions. They don't need to disturb the project team from what it's doing or anything else. They just walk in and say, if a stakeholder is interested in one particular feature that's on the backlog, and his interest today is whether or not they've started it yet. He walks in and look at the Kanban board, and if it's still if it's not progressed to work in progress, if it's not in that work in progress column, he knows it hasn't started yet.
That's right.
And then maybe he goes back and addresses with the product owner and go, hey, how come this, you agree this is going to be done in this iteration, and here we're halfway through the iteration and this isn't started yet. So what's going on? So,
right.
and then that conversation is between the stakeholder and the product owner, and it doesn't take the team members or the developers away from what they're doing. So,
yeah,
okay, because there may be a very simple, easy, logical explanation. It may be that all the product owner has to tell the stakeholder is, look, that feature is going to take 2 hours to accomplish. You're right. We're halfway through a 2-week iteration. We're not concerned at all about not getting that feature developed during this iteration because it's a 2-hour level of effort.
That's right.
Okay. Didn't realize it. Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. So, and there you go. And that to me is what some of the nuances of adaptive type methodology that traditionally I always had to deal with that myself. I had to handle that. And now there is a new way of doing it that takes that load, reduces some of my load and some of my burden that I have to do every day as far as a workload.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge benefit of the co-location is it's immediate feedback, immediate collaboration, even without effort, right? It just naturally occurs. And like you said, the leaders can just pull information from everything that's plastered on the wall. And I encourage teams out there to do that. Post as much information out there. So it's conversations you don't have to waste your time having.
Right. Exactly.
Some considerations, like if you had a negative to co-location, could be you don't have access to expertise talent because they're not at your location, right? Like you may run into a situation where you're going to have to bring in a SME and pay from the travel, or you put them on a virtual board, or you make some kind of hybrid situation where you can get access to the talent needed.
And we all know, even though all of that may work, none of it is as effective as face-to-face communication. Yeah, that's the most important thing about it.
Agreed. All right. So now Matrix, you're talking kind of a little bit of a mix in between projectized co-location versus hierarchical. What kind of things do you see there that would be a good thing or maybe even a bad thing?
Well, one of the challenges if you're pursuing adaptive type methodology in a matrix organization is that typically your team members are not full-time on the project. So when you're doing your estimating, typically the estimates are made as estimation of effort required or made in ideal time. That means the developer is full-time on this with no distraction. Well, in a matrix organization, that's not the way it works. The guy may have 2 hours today to work on the project and 2 hours in the afternoon, and then it changes tomorrow. So becomes very challenging in a matrix organization to have this adaptive methodology because, once again, some of the tenets of agile methodology is highly self-organized, self-motivated teams that are focused on value delivery. Well, if you got a member of your team who's working for a functional line manager part of the day and working for the project team part of the day, how can he be focused, completely 100% focused on the value delivery to the customer? And the answer is he can't. So now how you deal with it, I suppose, is that you base your estimated effort on ideal time. And then you step back and say, okay, my calendar is not ideal time. My calendar is, I got this guy 2 days, 2 hours a day. Okay. When a guy is working, a person is working on your project 2 hours a day, he's not going to come in and start a stopwatch and be effective for 2 hours. He's going to come in, he's going to have to spool up, which means because he hasn't been there since yesterday, he's going to have to go back and do some refreshing, and he's going to get spooled up, and then he's productive. And then he realizes that, hey, my time is up in 15 minutes. So he starts spooling down. So if you've got a 2-hour period of time for someone to work on your project, ideally, you probably only got an hour and a half of the guy's time. Oh, so that's what you have to put into your estimate and show that. So it's very difficult. I think, functional and even matrix organizations would be difficult to execute adaptive projects in. Now, I think a way of handling it is you take your functional people and you break them out of their normal functional organization, and you assign them to the project team full time while the project is underway, with the understanding that when the project is underway, they're going back to their functional job. And that would be a way to deal with it. But the downside of that is, one of the tenets of agile methodology is a team constantly improves. And it improves by doing iterations and working together and sharing team knowledge and those things. And if someone knows that, hey, I'm going to work on this project for 2 weeks and then I'm going back to my desk and I'm going to be off of it, there's a tremendous lack of motivation factor there. Whereas if you have people permanently assigned to the project organization that, hey, we're going to put you together. We're going to keep you together. Want you guys to learn to work together and want you to get, and the goal being that you're going to have continuous improvement and that you're going to do it every iteration. You're going to get better, and you're going to get better and better and better and better. I don't mean necessarily faster. I just mean better. You're going to communicate better. You're going to collaborate better. You're going to develop a higher quality product. You're going to increase customer satisfaction. Each iteration, it's going to get better. And you can do that with a team that is assigned to a project for the life of the project. And you can ensure that happens. But if they're coming and going or not full time, it's hard. It's the old pig and chicken as far as a ham and egg sandwich. The chicken's involved, the pig's committed.
That's right.
And what you want is commitment. And for adaptive methodology to work, you have to have committed team members. So.
Yeah. Wow, great. Yeah, in Matrix, you're serving two masters, your functional manager and your project manager. So we all know how that works out.
Yep, we've all done that in the past, and we all know the difficulty associated with that. So
yeah, but I love that you brought up a couple points, and I just want to iterate this for the listeners: is ideal time. I think that was genius, right? Because when we plan things, when we even in your home environment, you say, hey, it's going to take me 4 hours to get from, this town to the next town. That's ideal time.
If I can drive 60 miles an hour and there's no traffic backup and I don't run out of gas.
Right. And no bathroom breaks.
Exactly. No flat tires, none of that. Exactly. Yeah. 4 hours. And that's funny. That's what I have to explain to my wife when we go on a trip. She asked me, how long is it going to take us to get there? And I go, honey, it's going to take 10 hours driving time. Now, however, you need to stop to go to the bathroom, whenever you want to stop to stretch your legs, whenever you want to stop to get something to eat, when you want to stop to see something on the side of the road, none of that counts toward the 10 hours. Okay. The 10 hours is all on top of that. And
yeah. And great. I mean, it's an eye-opening thing, but it's something you really have to watch for. Like you said earlier, is break it down like to It's real time. Like how much time do they need spin up? How much time are they going to be looking at their watch when it's, quit time?
Exactly.
But I love also the commitment, right? If half my time is in my functional, that's where my long-term career job is.
Yeah. Who's writing your fit rep? That's,
Yeah.
and in the civilian world is who's going to determine your bonus check. Because
Right.
you signed an employment contract for your salary. So you're getting paid that. That's basically guaranteed. What's not guaranteed is the bonus. But everyone's focused on who determines my bonus. And that's the person they're looking to make happy.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So great point. I mean, who has that power? Most likely your functional manager, even if
Right.
it's your power, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
now let's talk this through on the hierarchical side. So
Okay.
think about military, right? That's a great example of a hierarchy. They've complete chain of command, reporting up. How do we run an adaptive project in a hierarchical environment or structure?
Well, I can tell you the direct experience I had. You may remember in the early 1990s, there was a movement within the Department of Defense for total quality leadership, TQL, and they sent commanding officers and prospective commanding officers to courses and instilled in them the importance of total quality leadership, and which was based on an adaptive, sort of inclusive, collaborative, open communication, so which goes against the hierarchical type structure of the military. So I happen to be a company commander in a CB battalion, and our battalion commander had decided that he needed to implement TQL into the battalion. So on Saturday mornings, there was a committee that was established, and I was selected to be on that committee because of my position as a company commander. And we were to sit around for 4 hours and to, first of all, discover what does it mean? What is TQL in a CB battalion? And then secondly, how do we develop a TQL program? And then how do we implement it into the battalion? So after 2 or 3 Saturday mornings of totally fruitless endeavors of trying to come up with what TQL is, and because it all butt up against taking away the authority of the commanding officer, and he wasn't interested in that at all. So after about in the middle of the third or fourth 4 hour iteration, the commanding officer is sitting at the head of the table, and he is sick and tired and disgusted with all our efforts and activities. And he looks around the table and he slaps the table. He goes, "Well, I've decided, if we can't get TQL the way I want it to be, then I'm not interested in it." And I said, there you go. And so that's how, and because he was the commanding officer, he wrote everybody's fitness report. So everybody agreed. You're right, Skipper. We're not going to do TQL. And so that was the demise of TQL in a CB battalion. And it is, I don't know how you could implement adaptive methodology in a hierarchical environment, because the people who are in the positions of power in the hierarchical organization are not interested in divesting themselves of the power and the control that they have. And it may not be for nefarious reasons. It may just simply be they don't trust the system. They are inexperienced with the system. But for whatever the reason is, it's always good to be king. And the king is not going to advocate being king just so to make everybody else in the kingdom happy.
Right.
That's, he'll do what he can do as king to make everybody happy, but he's not going to, step down from his throne in order to make everybody happy. And I think that it would be a wonderful PhD dissertation if you could figure out how to transition a hierarchical organization into an adaptive organization, and everybody within the organization be satisfied.
Right. Yeah. What an undertaking. I will say the way that you could do it if you were a project manager in a hierarchical situation is the king, like you said, would have to create a pocket, right? A cross-functional team. And then that way they don't advocate any authority, but this team goes. So the Air Force does rapid improvement events or Tiger teams. And I've been I've been a part of a couple of those. And those are adaptive projects within the hierarchical system, but they still retain control. So we work on, hey, go solve this, right? We had a sexual scandal in basic military training. So they got me and about 12 other individuals together. We sat around a room and said, okay, what can we do to help the character and long-term fix of the power imbalance that creates these pockets of issues that can arise, in an isolated environment. So that was our charter, if you will, and we did it in a hierarchical manner, but we were completely locked away. It almost turned it into what we talked about in the beginning. We became a co-located team in a war room, knocking out a project.
And now and I agree with you 100% that is the way to do it if that's what you want. But that, in my mind, though, that becomes a project oriented section in the hierarchy. So you're basically breaking it out. Now, as long as you have your autonomy, and of course, it all comes down to, as long as the hierarchical organization remains, whatever you produce or whatever your outcomes are, whatever, the king has to sanction it.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't sanction it, or if he's going to at least have line item veto. Oh yeah, this is a great idea. Yeah, I like this. No, I don't like this at all. We ain't doing this. And so that's right. But yes, but in my mind, I wasn't thinking it that way. I was thinking a purely hierarchy. How do you do this within the hierarchical organization? Doing what you're talking about, in my mind, is you break a team out, and that's the project team, and that's how, in most organizations, like manufacturing organizations, they execute. They're every day they're manufacturing. They're doing their operations every day, but there comes times when they need to do something different or improve something. They will put together a project team. Or they will have a standing project team, and that's their tasking. That's what they give them to do. And so operations goes on, manufacturing continues, everything goes on. But then the project team comes up with a revised process, or maybe a new product, or maybe a new material to use, or something. And they look at it and they test it and they adapt that in, and then they bring that into the operation. But the operation continues; it never stops. It's then all of a sudden it just gets absorbed into it and keeps going. And so I've been involved in that type of organization before.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, my was definitely more of a breakout of it's destroying the hierarchy, right? The other way I've seen a unit do it, and we trained this unit, and what they really did is at the lower worker bee level, they set up like Kanban boards, daily stand-ups, and they reported to the next level. And then that level got together and used some of the tools and techniques, and they became like a round table of stakeholders. And then they showed the value at the, if you want to call it a retro, they didn't always use the same terminology, but they would bring like the commanding officer in and say, hey, let's display this effort. So they would use the Kanban boards, and they would use some of the daily stand-ups and some of the adaptive approaches without disrupting the hierarchical chain. So it's more about using the tools and techniques rather than trying to adjust the structure, because you're not going to break the hierarchy. No commanding officer, like you said, is going to say, yeah, my authority's gone.
I'll give it up. Yeah. Well, yeah. You guys, y'all form a committee and run this company. Right.
That's right. Yeah. So, but great. I think that's two different ways. You have to break out a team, or you work the tools and techniques within your level or sphere of that hierarchy, right?
And let me make one other point here, Jeremy. I think you've hit on it. It's very important if you're trying to bring change into an organization, which according to PMI, that's what projects are all about. You have to focus on the organization as far as you have to get the organization to accept the fact that, hey, we need to change and that we need to find a better way to do this. And that is typically the toughest nut to crack. You have to convince the C-suite people, the CEO, the COO, the CFO, that this is necessary or important for us to do. And the way you do it is you put together a business plan that shows the benefit to the company and how it's going to benefit it, either financially, standing in the market, from a reputational standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, something. But you need to show a benefit, and then you need to make sure that the benefit is justified by the expense or the chaos or the potential risk or all these other things that come with it. The benefit has to trump all of that. And if that in fact happens, then you'll typically, if you're working in an organization that doesn't accept changes like that and suggestions for changes, yeah, I'd suggest you sharpen up your resume and go look for another organization to work in, because that's not a good place to work. And most companies are not that way. Most companies are looking to improve their profitability, number one, improve their standing in the industry, number two, improve their compliance with whatever they have to, being a good steward of the environment, being a place that employees like to work. All those things are important to well-run organizations, and you accomplish that by projects, by executing a project within an organization. So,
Ollie, once again, great segue into what we're talking about next is the different organizational process assets and environmental factors that help us facilitate those adaptive approaches. And one of them is that organization, right? That organization has to be willing to adapt to those approaches. So I think that's one of those great segues into this other section here. And I think, it kind of starts off with, do you need to probably document your agile framework? You need to say, hey, I'm committed, if you will. It's almost like an organizational charter saying, we as an organization are committed to doing X in this framework Y, right?
Exactly. And in your war room, on an information radiator, the Agile Manifesto needs to be posted. And probably the 12 principles that go along with the Agile Manifesto. And for the simple reason, when anyone questions, why are you doing this? You can just point to that right there, because we value customer collaboration and communication over negotiation. That's what we're doing. And, or whatever. So, yes. Now, we'll say also, in my experience in teaching classes, the OPAs and EEFs are a brand new concept to just about everyone in the class, but they get it immediately once you explain to them what they're all used to dealing with them. This is one of those new terminology, or a terminology that PMI uses that they've never heard of, or what an OPA, what is that? And it's it's easy. It's any policies, procedures, processes that the company has, and that you're required to work under, and it's any organizational knowledge base that you have. And that's your old lessons learned, engineering wikis, libraries or archives, or any of that stuff, and old organizational charts and procurement rules and regulate and all those. It's basically the artifacts or the documents that the company uses or produces, and it's what the OPAs are. And then the EEFs, the EEFs, once again, it's simple. There's internal ones and there's external ones. The internal ones sometimes are within your span of control. You can control those, resource capabilities, organizational culture, IT software they're using, distribution of facilities, how your team is located, where they're located, all those sort of things like that. You've got a little control over. You making shift software, buy new software, buy stuff like that. And that you can control that, and you should, based on the context of your project. But then the external ones, like marketplace conditions, laws and regulations and compliance requirements, operating conditions, social and cultural influences, and things that are going on out there in the wide world of information. Those sort of things are completely outside your span of control. You can't tune them out. You got to pay attention to them, but you can't spend a whole lot of time of wait, because any effort you spend toward influencing is wasted, because those things are outside their external environmental factors. And those, you just need to be aware of. That's the environment that you're having to live and operate within. Not that you need to go out and change it, just live with it. We're dealing with that. Look how social norms are changing today and how they've changed in the last 10 years. And they're going to continue to change. Look how information is changed and things. I got a friend of mine who's a high school teacher, and we were talking the other day about textbooks. And they don't have, kids aren't issued textbooks anymore in the school that he's in. They have textbooks in the classroom if the kids want to use, but everything is on their phone. Anything, they have an app, and anything they need, read a chapter in a textbook or whatever, they pull it up on their phone. It's all in the palm of their hand. And they don't have to, number one. So I was asking him about, okay, well, if kids don't have textbooks, do you still have lockers in the school? He goes, oh yeah, we got lockers. They're old, the school's was built 25, 30 years ago, and they put lockers in, and the lockers are still there. I said, so what do the kids do with the lockers? He goes, nothing. He goes, as a matter of fact, he goes, we rent the lockers. If you want to have a place to store stuff, your lunch or whatever, an oversized backpack or another pair of shoes or anything like that, you can rent a locker at the high school and put, and I'm thinking back of how that's changed from when I went to school, where you had 8 classes or 7 classes. Every class had a textbook. And it was before the invention of backpacks somehow. Nobody ever had the idea of a backpack. And so you had to haul these books around with you everywhere you went, or put them in your locker. And, but that's just an example of how things have changed. Kids, get their information from their telephone today. So,
yeah. Oh, great example. I like it. I like how you explain, the organizational process assets. I usually explain it OPA. It's the uncle. It's the German word for grandpa, right? So it's the old guy that's up in the attic that knows everything about the company. And if you have a question for him, you go ask him, and he's got some great wisdom for you. That's like OPA. Lessons learned database. You said that. It could be whatever agile tools they buy, like if they buy Jira or they buy Microsoft Project, and they add the agile to it, or Monday or Slack, or all these different organizational tools. And then environmental factors. I love that you brought them into it internal, because most of the time we think of them as external. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, the guys up in Congress, right, north of Richmond, they're saying, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to enact this law, and that means you got to do X. And, so that's external. Like you said, internal stuff could be like culture.
Yep.
Difficult to control, but you could influence it, right, with your project. And then getting the organizational to allow self-empowered teams. I found that to be when we talk to units, companies, one of the biggest hurdles is for a leadership minded individual to embrace a self-empowered team.
Yep.
It's like, hey,
threatening.
Inmates are running the prison.
for a person in power, empowering a project team within his organization is threatening. It's absolutely threatening. And so what you have to do is make that person not feel threatened. And the way you do that is, number one, clean, open communications with them, full collaboration, transparency about what you're doing. So and eat the apple one bite at the time. Don't go in and ask for the whole apple. Just, ask, let me take a bite. Okay. Just let me have a bite. And then let me show you the value that I can add. And then you decide whether or not the value is worth the fact that you just lost a bite of your apple. And then you think about it for a while, see how it works, see how it all plays out. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask for a second bite of that apple. Mm-hmm. And then you, as the organization leader, makes the decision. No, you ain't getting another bite of my apple. But I will guarantee you this, because companies are focused on profitability, things like profitability and market share and standing within the industry and things like that. If your value added that you are offering adds to profitability, productivity, stature within the industry, those sort of things, they're gonna, if they are, like I said, if that's a CEO or CFO or COO is not interested in that, you need to go find somewhere else to work, because that you don't have a bright future there, because that is not an organization that's going to excel. It's survive. You got to have open-minded people who are smart, and they don't need to be the smartest person in the room. All they need to do is recognize they don't need to be the smartest person in the room. Just as long as I've got the smartest person in my room, that's all I need.
Right.
And he's working for me, then, hey, I don't need to be that guy, but I need to make sure I've got that guy.
And that environment. I think that's the biggest benefit to adaptive is its incremental and iterative value delivery, right?
Exactly.
And if you don't build that environment where it can thrive, where you embrace that, mm-hmm. your competitor probably is, right? Mm-hmm. So it's time to market these days. I mean, the American attention span's down to like 19 seconds or less. So what they want is the newest, hottest thing yesterday, right? So mm-hmm. the way you deliver that value is through adaptive. It just gives you quicker value delivery to the customer. So like if you're a product manager or you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I'm delivering stuff, you're probably going to benefit from some sort of an adaptive, incremental, or iterative delivery system.
Right. And this got me to thinking back on, why are deep ocean engineering projects 5 years long? And but mainly that's driven because of the manufacturing time to make this equipment that you put on the seafloor, and also driven by the permitting process that's controlled by the federal government, which once again, those are EIFs that are outside your span of control. No matter how bad you want a blowout preventer, you're only going to get it in as quickly as well controls can build. Okay. And where you fall on their delivery schedule and those sort of things. Secondly, you have to do this engineering in order to get the permit. I mean, you have to show the federal government, a complete set of plans and specifications for this platform that you're planning on installing. And then at the same time, you've got to get, a company out there to drill and complete the wells, and how, and make sure those wells are functional and that they flow, and get them all done. So, and then there's this big orchestration that happens at the end where the wells that are drilled and completed and are ready to flow are connected to the subsea hardware via the jumpers that you had designed and manufactured. And then they go to the manifolds, which then distribute the oil out to a pipeline that was either already in place or you had to build and design and put that in place. And then that oil goes ashore somewhere to a refinery. And you don't just put oil in a pipeline and send it to a refinery. There's contracts involved. You have to make your deliveries at a specified time. So there is just sitting down on the back of an envelope the other day, just sketching out the requirements and stuff, and like all of a sudden it became intuitively obvious. Yeah, why does it take 5 years to do this? And the problem from the business standpoint is once the project is sanctioned by the oil company, the cash register is opened and money starts flowing out. And not a dime flows in for 5 years until everything is completed, hooked up, tested, and commissioned. And when that oil starts flowing through that pipeline, then the cash register goes the other way. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. But for 5 years, that you can spend $5 billion and not get one dime back. And all along knowing that there may be external environmental factors that happen that you have no control of, that you can't flow that well 5 years from now because the federal government says, nah, we're going to make batteries and make wind turbines and solar panels. So we're going to throttle the domestic production. And that's a risk you take. You've already spent the $5 billion.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Now that's a great example of a predictive project that can be impacted by an external EVE.
Yep, exactly.
Well, that's too cool. Hey, a great story to kind of wrap it up on. As we end this episode, we really covered a lot of ground with pros and cons to adaptive and predictive. So we kind of juxtaposed those two different methodologies against each other. We also talked about the organizational structures between colocation, virtual teams. We hit matrix, we hit hierarchy. And then we also, we ended with, the OPAs and the EVEs that can help you through an adaptive environment. Anything stand out that you want to, just kind of wrap this up on, Max?
One thing that we were remiss and did not mention, and that is back about when you're in the selection process or looking at the pros and cons between adaptive and predictive, there's this model called the Stacy complexity model. And it lays it out. Well, it's based on your requirements and your technical capabilities and how close to agreement you are and close to certainty those things are. And it lays it out in a two-dimensional diagram where if you're in the lower left-hand corner, predictive methodology is probably the best way to approach it because it's fairly simple as far as the requirements and the technical capabilities concerned. As you progress on up through across the chart there and things become more complicated and complex, then you merge into the adaptive arena where adaptive methodologies tend to be more productive and work better in those situations. And then as you continue on and get up into the upper right-hand corner of that diagram, you approach the area they call chaos. And there, the recommendation is to go back to a predictive type methodology simply because the hierarchical nature of a predictive environment may allow you to control some of the chaos. But if you're in the middle part of that diagram where you have complex and complicated issues and decisions need to be made and all the answers aren't available up front, then you're in the adaptive methodology arena.
Oh, great.
If you're not in that space, then predictive is probably the way to go. And it's in the student guide, and it's a simple little diagram. And if you spend some time looking at it, then all the stuff that we've talked about for the last hour tends to make sense. I think it brings it out visually of the way to, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your boss tells you, okay, project manager, pick, what are we going to do? We're going to do this predictive, or we're going to do this adaptive. If you use the Stacy complexity model, number one, it will probably steer you in the right direction. Number two, it's a great shield to have to stand behind when someone ever questions, hey, why in the world did you pick this? Well, based on the requirements and the technical capabilities we had and knowledge we had at the time, this is where we fell on the Stacy complexity model. And that's why I chose that method. And so that's a great shield to be able to say. And you can say, now, granted, now at today, we have discovered that the requirements have changed and our technical capability is not what we thought it was. And therefore, we are no longer in the area that we thought we were. And we are back into where we should be using, where based on Stacy's complexity model, we should be using another type of methodology.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow, I'm glad you brought that up, and what a wonderful add-on too. It's like adaptive kind of thrives in that hourglass of around the fringe of chaos.
Yep.
And not simplicity, right? So it's
right.
like, if you've done
between simplicity and chaos.
That's
exactly.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, because if you've done it, I mean, let's break it down to something it's fairly easy. If you go grocery shopping, that's pretty low complexity, but there's a lot of things going on, but it's easily repeatable. Sit at home, make your grocery list.
Yep.
Right. If it's so chaotic you can't even define it, you better sit down and plan a little bit. Or you redefine the project altogether. Like, it's like, don't touch it if it's in the house of pain of chaos, right? But if you don't, you have more questions than answers. You sit in that little hourglass of, hey, we could do this adaptively because we need all our stakeholders really close to make immediate decisions back to back to help the project produce. So I love it. What great.
Let me give you an add on to what you just said, your example about the grocery shopping. Because my wife, she is the person, she sits down and she plans the meals that we're going to have for the week. And then based on the meals, she plans the groceries that she needs to buy to support those meals. And then she goes into the ads and finds out which grocery store, Target, Walmart, whatever, has the things she's needing to buy on sale and plans her shopping trip that way. Now, when we were out cruising, though, down in the Caribbean, especially in the Bahamas, you never had the luxury of knowing what was going to be on the shelves in the grocery store. So she had to completely change and go to an adaptive type of methodology where we would go into a village and go to the local market or grocery store. She would see what food was available to purchase, and she would buy what was a good value. And then she would have to plan on her feet then, okay, how do I incorporate this into a dish? And then how do I incorporate the dish into a meal? And then do all that. So she had to turn it around. And that really upset her initially. But then she grew to, she liked it because she is basically a spontaneous sort of person, or she enjoys spontaneity, I should say, but she's a very calculated, planning sort of A-type personality sort of person. So, but when you made that example about the grocery store, and that's exactly what she does today. She's back to predictive methodology for her grocery shopping today. But outside of America, she had to shift to an adaptive methodology in order to procure, because there was no guarantee that there was going to be hamburger and turkey and steaks and whatever else there was going to be available. You purchased what was available that day.
Oh yeah, what a great analogy, great story, and I think it helps people. Why would I do it predictively if it was super easy? Right? Because it's super easy and you just build your plan and you knock it out. It's repeatable.
And what I'm really enjoying now about studying more about adaptive methodology is that I see in the past, I mean, if you asked me, 6 months ago, hey, have you ever done adaptive methodology type project management? I would go, no, absolutely not. Now I realize, yes, I did. I didn't recognize what I was doing. And it wasn't purely agile. It was a hybrid, but what I recognize now and what I find to be very beneficial, and as far as adding value to a situation or an individual, is the fact that you can shift from predictive to adaptive back to predictive based on what PMI calls the context of your project, and you tailor the processes and procedures you use in order to benefit the project. And so all these things are starting to become tied up together now, and I'm seeing it. I'm coming to this realization myself now. So so it should be exciting. I'm hoping the students that are out there that are just taking on formalized project management now, that they do enter this with an open mind, and that there's always more than one way to skin a rabbit, and PMI has recognized that. And even though they're committed to producing and supporting professional project managers, they're also embracing agile methodology that says we don't need no stinking project manager. And so I find that encouraging, and that they do that, and I see it now in everyday real world occurrences, and how the two work together. So
Yeah, I agree. If the only thing you got is a hammer, everything's a nail. So I mean,
yep, exactly. Exactly. If you go through life with a hammer in your hand, yep, everything's a nail. So
that's right. But there's so many different ways to approach it, and you don't always. You said something really prophetic, I think, is you don't always have to stick with one methodology, even on the same project. There's different phases of a project and different increments that could benefit hugely by adaptive. And then when it gets back to simple and repetitive, go right back to planned. I mean, you're good to go.
And project managers that can develop the ability to shift seamlessly between predictive and adaptive, they are going to prove themselves to be extremely valuable to organizations because of the way our world is changing and shifting, stuff like that. And having anybody that's adaptable and that can understand, has been on both sides of the fence and knows how to graze on either side of the fence. And it's very valuable. And it's just like we talked about in the last podcast about, developing the technical skill of variance calculation, cost and schedule variance calculation. That is the most important technical skill for a project manager to develop, because that allows you then to forecast, which is the most valuable thing that any manager can do, whether you're a project manager, a functional manager, any manager. If you have the ability to forecast accurately into the future, you are of value to the organization.
Yeah.
Because most people operate looking in the rearview mirror.
Right.
That's all they've got the data. This is what the data shows. This is what the last monthly report shows, and all that. And everybody's operating out of the rearview mirror. But if you can forecast, you're looking out the windshield. And what will happen is, because you're looking out the windshield and they're all looking at the rearview mirror, you get to drive the bus.
That's right.
Because you're looking out the windshield, and the higher ups in the company are going to realize, yes, the less risk for this organization is to let Max drive the bus, because he's looking out the windshield. Everybody else is looking out the rearview mirror.
That's right. Yeah, great analogy. Wow, thanks so much for your time again. I think everybody got a lot out of this one. We covered a lot of ground, but ultimately it was a lot of back and forth between predictive and agile, and in the real world, I think in real project management, it's a lot of combined. It's a lot of hybrid. So
it is. So don't pick a side.
Don't pick a side.
No, learn both. That's what I'm really enjoying now. I'm really increasing my knowledge about agile methodologies, and it helps. It definitely helps me as a predictive project manager, because I know this stuff. So it's like I said, it's a great skill set to have, to be able to do both and to combine the two together, and most importantly, to work in the hybrid space between the two, because that's where you're really going to make deliver the biggest value, is in the hybrid space.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Okay, look forward to it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the PM Pathfinder series and want to join the profession, certify, or maintain your PDUs by visiting vets2pm.com and looking up Project Manager Essential Toolbox or a bootcamp.